Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Devin and I read books, and this is Devin Reads Books, and today I'm gonna pick a fight. Today I'm gonna talk about why I think Dragonlance is better than Lord of the Rings. Now, alright, so I know that's some charged terminology there, alright? Okay. But I got some valid reasons, and I want to be clear that I am a Lord of the Rings fan. I love Tolkien, but this is not fantasy that you can just kind of give to any fantasy fan and they will enjoy, for some reasons we'll get into. Where I think Dragonlance and most stuff that Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss have done is. So let's start it off with reason number one, and that is the character work. So there's a lot of discussion about Tolkien's characters and how many of them are not super detailed. They're not super fleshed out. They're almost regular people. We don't see a bunch of kind of their background or their a bunch of traumas surrounding them. We'll get a little bit of glimpse into who they were before, but Tolkien's story kind of focuses on who the Fellowship are in the moment while the journey is happening. And even then, I would argue we don't get a ton of stuff really fleshed out. Specific characters will, Frodo and Sam, have their moments, but that's kind of it. It's kind of a weird thing to describe if you've never read Tolkien, but he doesn't go super deep into character work in the same way a lot of modern fantasy does. Like if you compare characters from Lord of the Rings to characters from Game of Thrones characters feel way more fleshed out. And Dragonlance really breaks into the character work. So all the characters do tend to fall into fantasy tropes, but we get a lot of character investment. We learn their motivations, we learn their traumas, we learn how their weird relationships work between the different party members in Dragonlance. We learn about Caramon and Raistlин's kind of traumatic upbringing, and we get all this implied stuff that happened at the Tower of Sorcery before they ever joined the rest of the party. And we get all these little threads into their backgrounds, and we see characters kind of shift from one sense of morality to a more vague one, or vice versa. And I think that works so much better than focusing on like the plot of destroying the ring and kind of fleshing out the world. Reason number two why I like Dragonlance more is simply the prose. Before I even get into any criticisms, we're just going to open to a random page. Briefly, Strider told of the attack on their camp under Weathertop and of the deadly knife. He drew out the hilt, which he had kept, and handed it to the elf. Glorfindel shuddered as he took it, but he looked intently at it. It feels very, very old English, even compared to something more epic fantasy, but modern, like Game of Thrones or Brandon Sanderson. Random chapter of Dragons of Winter Night. At this point, one of the Caganesti pointed at Gilthanas and said something sharply to Silvara. Gilthanas looked at her, not understanding. The elf maid smiled. He asks if you are too grand an elf lord to paddle, because if you are, he will allow your lordship to swim. Just a one-to-one comparison, this sounds more modern. And if you are in the mood for a flowery prose that takes you into a mythological world, like you just read the Iliad and you want more, Tolkien all the way. Tolkien's prose is beautiful, but if you are a modern fantasy reader, it's going to be a lot more difficult to get into it than it would be something pseudo-modern. I mean, technically this is like a 30-year-old series, but still, it's very different. And I usually tell people when they are interested in reading Tolkien that reading Tolkien is like it's like a combination of reading classic literature and mythology, especially if you get into like the Silmarillion or the Fall of Gondolin or like Unfinished Tales, some of these other side books. And honestly, even I need to reread. And some of them I don't even recommend people read. The Silmarillion, most people that pick up the Silmarillion will not be able to get through it because of how it reads, right? This type of prose is unfortunately it's a floodgate for some people. It'll completely turn them off when they really should. If they want to get into fantasy, they need to kind of dip their toe into stuff like Dragonlance or stuff like Brandon Sanderson, stuff like Game of Thrones, and kind of work their way up to Tolkien. And I think that is a problem. Reason number 3, and I'm not even going to hold up Tolkien for this, Dragonlance has actual magic. So the way magic works in Tolkien's whole world is it's not really magic as we would think of it. And that sounds weird to say, but the wizards in Lord of the Rings are really more akin to angels. We're not going to go super deep into the lore. Your average person in Lord of the Rings cannot learn magic. They can't pick it up. The wizards were sent down to Middle-earth to prepare for basically everything. Prepare for Melkor to come back, who is a character you don't really know unless you read the books and all this other stuff. There's not really a magic system in Lord of the Rings that anyone has access to other than Gandalf, the other Maiar, or above. Dragonlance is a D&D-esque world. There's a million different types of magic. Essentially, you have outright wizards who learn at the Tower of Sorcery. You have clerics. That is a center plot point in the first book, actually, of the Dragonlance Chronicles. I didn't write it down as a separate point, but Lord of the Rings is really low fantasy for the entity that created all of this high fantasy that we all now love. It's very much just a couple people have magic. There's hobbits, and there's orcs, and there's elves and dwarves. But ultimately, it's like historical England. There's just not a ton of magic in this world. If we don't get Lord of the Rings, we don't get like Stormlight, we don't get Dragonlance, we don't get these series where magic is the forefront of the narrative. But there's no real magic in Lord of the Rings. I mean, there kind of is, but they're basically just like gods and angels, right? You either have the magic or you don't. And I don't love that. I don't love that in fantasy. Although I will say that's not necessarily a big gripe for most people, because right now fantasy is kind of going through this renaissance where low magic, grimdark stories are just to the moon, man. They're just skyrocketing in popularity. But that is a hit against Tolkien for me personally. Guys, those are the big reasons why I personally prefer something like Dragonlance over Lord of the Rings. Again, I love Tolkien's work. I'm actually rereading the books as we speak. I just started Return of the King today, actually, and eventually I want to reread the Silmarillion. That's a lot. That's a lot, though. We'll get there when we get there. I do want to talk more Dragonlance on this channel, but I am all booked out for a little bit. I do recommend you read both. So this edition of Dragonlance that we talked about was released not that long ago. I'm pretty sure you can still get it on Amazon, but the books you can still get in mass market. They're not difficult to get at all. If you have not read Lord of the Rings, read Lord of the Rings. The only thing you need to know prior is that the prose is going to be very slow, it's going to be very flowery, and you're going to get a lot of like history and songs. Take your time with it, really sit back and let yourself enjoy it. You won't regret it. It's not my favorite fantasy, but it is very obvious. It's very easy to tell how it became what it became and how it became so many people's favorite fantasy. That is all I had for this video. Please drop a comment if you disagree. I want to hear some of the reasons that you guys might like Lord of the Rings over other fantasy that's kind of out there right now. I would love to kind of hear that. Again, it's really easy to get lost in Tolkien's world, so I do recommend you check it out if you haven't already. This video is very tongue-in-cheek. I definitely love both, but I have a lot of editing to do. I am reading a ton of horror right now, and I need to get on all of that. So thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.